Thank you, Reverend, for giving me the pleasure of being able to address the congregation today. Now, I had actually prepared a few notes, but I'm actually going to put that aside for the moment and tell a bit of a story. My partner would call it a teachable moment because of all the water that's been raining upon us at the moment. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my involvement out in the Hunua Ranges in particular. So, as I'm sure we're all aware, the Hunua Ranges right now have been experiencing some significant rainfall, and I've heard through the grapevine that there's this magic number of a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event. Now, that's a very big event over a very sustained period of time that's basically overflown the various water reservoirs that are out in the catchment over there. And as Helen was just explaining, that's affected the water supply in Auckland because of one of the major water treatment plants out there. The water treatment plant is run by Watercare, and basically the reason that we have to conserve water is not because there isn't enough of it, but it's because that the places that they're getting the water from have had a lot of silt stirred up as a result of the rainfall. And one of the big treatment sort of processes inside a water treatment plant is a sand filter. So if you have lots of silt, all of the silt clogs the sand, and then the sand gets more difficult to dislodge. So as there's lots more sand coming into the system, they can't actually keep up with the supply because they have to keep cleaning the filters. And hence why we are all sort of having to conserve water. Some people might say, why don't we just take more out of the Waikato? It's kind of the same thing because it's very turbid there too. And I suppose what I've been doing over the last few days actually is I've been out in the Hunua Ranges, I've been working with Watercare, and I've been working with one of our long-term clients, Camp Adair, run by the YMCA. You may have seen them on the news on Friday, and they got flooded at the same time. And one of the things that we manage quite on their behalf is the interaction with Watercare, releasing all the water from the dams. And then Camp Adair sits downstream of them, and actually when they release more water, they tend to flood Camp Adair. So you've heard that there's a range of issues in that catchment, and that's just sort of part of what I've been doing over the last little while, just responding to some of that detail. So I guess, as Helen explained, I'm an environmental manager in effect, and what that means is that I get quite a holistic view, a little bit more high level perhaps than some of our water engineers in our team. So I don't think a lot about water in pipes too much, but I do try to help plan where they go and help decide what should happen when we need to discharge water or when we need to take water. I wanted to contextualise a little bit the sort of global issue and then come down into what's happening nationally and then a little bit more in the local context for Auckland as well. So I don't want to get too wrapped up in the numbers, but I suppose I am a scientist, so I do like them. I think I wanted to ask a question, why is water important? And everyone here today has heard a little bit about that. But from my perspective, water is important because humans need it, and humans need it for life. Humans are 60% water, approximately, and what we have right now on Earth, there's no more of it coming, so we can create a little bit of it, but in essence, it's a water cycle, and we're recycling all of the water that we are using today. I took a few more numbers from the US Geological Survey because I like to contextualize how much water there is. So, on Earth, there is 1.4 billion cubic kilometers. Now, no one knows what that number really looks like, but I can probably tell you that it's about 1/15 of the moon in volume. So that's how much water is on Earth. That's 96% of that is salt water. So 4% of that 1/15 of the moon is 10.6 million cubic kilometres. So this is all of the fresh water that we would normally take and drink. And that, in some sort of round number, is about enough water to cover all of the US in 1 meters, in water 1 meter deep. Now, if I took that one step further and said how much of that is surface water, i.e. in a river or a lake that's fresh, that becomes 93,000 cubic kilometres of surface water, and that's about 186 Sydney harbours, 22 Grand Canyons. So this is all of the water that we as humans have easy access to as on Earth. A lot of that is also locked up in glaciers and that kind of thing. So you can see that fresh water and what we're seeing over the last week is a very, very small portion of what is readily available. And I think when I think about why we like water because we need it for our food, ourselves, and I suppose the continuity of our generations as well. And I think about it in two themes, kind of quality and quantity. So in terms of quantity, that's about how people can access it and what our actions can do to influence how people take it and where from. And I think that on a global scale, this is where we are really, where there's a big constraint at the moment. So I'm sure that a number of you, all of you, will have heard some of these quotes about how this century's wars are not going to be fought over oil or anything else, but they'll be fought over water. And that's about accessibility to water, because there are a number of countries out there who aren't as gifted as New Zealand, and they have a real problem accessing water. It's not a new issue though, so I just wanted to sort of show that water rights, allocation and sort of access have been around for as long as we've had borders really. So I wanted to take an example. So the Nile River itself, it comes through from mainly 3 different countries. It starts in Ethiopia, it flows through Sudan, and then it ends up flowing through Egypt before it ends up in the Mediterranean. And one of the ways that water allocation and quantity is managed is through international treaties. So if I was in Ethiopia, I might be very tempted to take all of the water that was falling on Ethiopia and keep it for myself if I was wanting to, I suppose, maintain the own resource allocation for my population. But there are international treaties that require Ethiopia to allow a certain volume of water down the Nile through to the next user, Sudan, and then again down to Egypt. And this happens all across the world. So there's the Danube in Europe, and there's a number of other countries that have international treaties that require allocation to be thought of in a much more managed manner. That's probably not a big deal to New Zealand, though, because we aren't surrounded by any other countries, but I suppose if you think about it in the local context, we have this similar situation, you know. I have a farmer out in Clevedon, and I might want to take a certain amount of water to irrigate my paddocks. Maybe not this week, but further on, I may want to take it during the height of summer when I have a low flow in my river, and I'd want to take that to be able to make my crops grow so that I can milk my cows so that I can make more money. Now, in New Zealand, we manage allocation in much the same way. It's not an international treaty, but it is one of those avenues that the Resource Management Act helps us manage. And you can see that one of the big constraints in New Zealand now and going forward will be allocation. So right now in Canterbury, in Bay of Plenty, in Waikato, we see major constraints on how people can access water, what is fair use of water, and how you can actually demonstrate that you are able to still provide some environmental and sort of some of those less economic well-beings as a result of that. So it's not just a global issue, it's a New Zealand issue too on the allocation front. The other thing that I wanted to really thematically talk about today was water quality. So water quality, it's not a big deal when you're thinking about getting access to water, so you need the water first, and you can actually spend quite a lot of money to be able to make water drinkable or usable for your crops. In New Zealand, we don't have that problem, but we do have a problem about water quality, or a growing problem, perhaps I should say, if I was less controversial. We've just had a new policy statement released by the government. It's the Clean Waters policy, I suppose, statement that is out for consultation right now. And I think you've probably heard about this quite recently. Again, very topical, teachable moment. 90% of New Zealand's rivers to be swimmable by 2040, 80% to be swimmable by 2030. And I think this is one of the constraints, particularly in New Zealand, that we are dealing with at the moment. And that's an interface between how we manage sort of the longer term use of one of these resources and how we leave it for our kids and others down gradient in the future. So you'll have heard about that, and I won't give my opinion on it, but it's open for consultation right now, and I think there are a few touch points that are important to think about. So the national average in New Zealand at the moment is sitting at about 70% rivers swimmable. That's river by length. And essentially they're looking for another 10% on top of that. In Auckland, that number is just under 60% is swimmable by the definition. And so there's a real step change that's required in Auckland to be able to get to that swimmability. There are a number of contaminants that I probably won't go into, but there's E. coli, which I'm sure everyone has heard about, which is an indicator for a range of bacteriological or viruses that might affect human health, but there's also nutrients that are part of that mix. So there's some good thinking that's going on about what New Zealanders would like to have in their country by a certain date. So I guess there's some thoughts from the government about whether 2030 is the right time and what needs to be put in place to achieve that. So I guess that's something that is out in consultation right now and worth looking at. It is quite pictorial, the consultation document, and so quite readable. I suggest you do have a look at it on the ministry's website. Finally, I guess I wanted to bring it a little bit more to Auckland and the context. So we talked a little bit about right now and what's happening in water. Now, I guess I'm sure the majority of you know that Watercare is sort of the council organisation that manages water and wastewater for Auckland. And there are some numbers that I just wanted to throw out again, just to show that there's major infrastructure spending going on here. That's new pipes, new treatment plants, and new ways to sort of manage water and wastewater. So Watercare is looking at spending approximately $5 billion over the next 10 years. That's essentially 4 water view connections being spent over the next 10 years. 4 bridges, 5 kilometres of tunnels for water view connections. So that times 4 is going to be spent on water infrastructure over the next short period. And the operating budget for Watercare is approximately $300 million a year. So this is the type of spending that I suppose your and our rates go into to contribute to sort of help manage our water. In Auckland, the water is supplied by the Waikato River and also by the Hanua and Waitakere Ranges reservoirs that I earlier spoke about. So there's some quite resilient supply there, apart from the turbidity issues that we're receiving right now. But the main, I suppose, constraints from my perspective in Auckland are on urban streams. And that's about the swimmability, and it's about the contaminants that we're broadly sort of discharging into those streams. So I think I wanted to come back to the gradual hymn that I just heard, actually. And one of the things that I thought was really nice to hear is that there is a touch the earth lightly use the earth gently. And I think we need to think about that when we're thinking about water in the context of Auckland and in New Zealand in particular. I had a few words down here about how we're very inefficient in using water. We have so much of it, and we're quite wasteful. We take water out of rivers, we spread it on land to help our grass grow. Most of that falls through. We pick up contaminants as a result of that, and it ends up in our watercourses. So, we talked about the water cycle and the fact that it comes around again, but what it does do is it makes it very difficult for us to take and use water with the same efficiency as we started with. So we need to be, I think, mindful as we're all here to make sure that we are minimising our water use as much as possible and encouraging ourselves and our family to really think about what efficiency of water is and to touch the earth gently for, I suppose, tomorrow. So I'm around for a little bit more, and I appreciate that I've been a little bit all over the show today because I threw away my notes. But if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them after the congregation. Thanks.